All right, so welcome back. I was going to There we go. It's cooperating now. Okay, so if you think back, do you remember another philosophy that's kind of similar to Buddhism? Um, think back to the Hellenistic period when all this is going on. So we've got the philosophy of Stoicism. And what do the Stoics say? They say you should accept your passions, or you should accept the things that are going on around you by letting go of your passions. When you're in this chaotic world, you should let go of the passions, and then you'll experience this state of peace and be free from the sufferings of the world and from the chaos of the world. You will be undisturbed. That's the Stoic philosophy. And doesn't that sound an awful lot like what Buddhism is talking about? I can't help but wonder, because we know for sure that Buddhists interacted with the Selekids, even set up statues there. And there was definitely some cultural fusion. So it's very possible that Stoic philosophy was influenced in some way by Buddhism, or that the two were sort of sharing ideas back and forth. There's not a whole lot of hard evidence to prove it, but I think it would make total sense, since they're talking about very similar themes, except that Stoicism doesn't have this figure of the Buddha within it. But maybe it picked up some of his ideas. Who knows? Okay. So yeah, like I said, Buddhism goes east to China as well, in addition to being spread by Ashoka. So what about Buddhism in China? How does it change? Well, as Buddhism goes into China, it develops more schools of thought and more philosophies. And like I said, the Mahayana school definitely takes over. Um, and you see different sort of Buddhist relics. So we can look at some Buddhist architecture here. A stupa. So the stupa is a resting place, a shrine for the Buddha, or for a bodhisattva, or for one of the saints, the arhats. Um, it's sort of a resting place for holy relics, things that they touched or interacted with in their lifetimes. So a bodhisattva's sandals, you could touch them and gain some of their energy, gain some of their power to protect you and bring good things and good luck to your life, and achieve and get you a little bit closer towards enlightenment, maybe. So even though Buddhism seems like it's such a hard-nosed philosophy about psychology and enlightenment, there pretty quickly emerges these ways in which people can do worship and have holy relics and things like that. And the stupa is just basically a sort of originally it starts off as a burial mound where these relics are, and then as time goes on, stupas get more and more elaborate. These and people come to them to gain some of the holy power of the bodhisattvas. There's one in Crestone, actually, Tibetan stupa. This is a more Tibetan design with white and gold and all these colors. And this is about a spiritual teacher who was brought over by his followers to Crestone. Crestone's a cool place because there's a decree actually that you get land very inexpensively if you're going to build a religious institution of any kind, whether that's a Christian monastery, a Buddhist monastery, anything like that. So this is a pretty cool one to go and visit. You can go hiking there and see this stupa, which has the relic of founder there. Of course, if you put a bunch of stupas on top of each other, you might end up with something like a pagoda. And in China and Tibet and Japan, this becomes a popular way to house Buddhist relics as well. And this is a very Chinese style of architecture with the square curving roof. And this building, usually that's what the purpose it serves, is as a sort of shrine, a holy shrine for the relics of a particular bodhisattva. Okay, so when Buddhism enters China and Japan, new ideas develop, and these all kind of fit under the big umbrella, the big ferry boat, I should say, of the Mahayana Buddhism, but they also have their own ways of doing things and their own interpretations. You might have heard of Zen Buddhism. Zen Buddhism is very, very, very focused on meditation. It's, very much, it's less about the gods and more about simplicity and simple meditation. It's more about, even though you'll have teachers who will help guide you towards enlightenment, but it's still all about you at the end of the day. It's about going deep within yourself and finding that place of stillness so that you can experience enlightenment. And so Zen tends to have a lot of wacky and interesting teachers who will help you achieve this kind of monastic focus. There's stories of teachers who will, slap the student upside the head to get him to focus better, or play weird tricks on him to catch him off guard and make sure that he spends his whole time paying attention. Zen Buddhists would say that paying attention is what Buddhism is all about, and sort of not being caught up in sort of the chaos of your mind. So that's what Zen Buddhists try to achieve. Their architecture tends to be very simple, made out of wood, tend to be a lot of monasteries. And another thing they do is use koans, these paradoxes, to try and get people to break past their assumptions and to sort of break your brain so that you can achieve enlightenment better. You might have heard the sound of what's the sound of one hand clapping is a koan. And, if you're feeling like a smart aleck, you might answer like this or like this. But that's not really the whole point. The point is more to just pose an impossible question. And so by thinking about the impossible question, it will sort of break your old way of thinking and break past your old mentalities that are keeping you from getting closer to enlightenment. So it'll help sort of get you on that path by messing with your head. Another koan is, show me the face you had before you were born. And, they're not looking for a real answer. It's more like, what does that mean? That's how you're going to sort of break out of your own way of thinking. And it's said that Zen stems back to a sermon of the Buddha's where he just held up a flower. Instead of preaching a sermon, he just held up a flower. And nobody got what he was trying to say by that, except one guy. And that one guy founded Zen Buddhism. That's the story anyway. And what he meant seems to be like, focus on the thing, focus on the world itself. Don't focus on anything else. Like, experience the flower. The flower is it. It's the whole thing. Just, encounter one thing in the universe, and that's all you need to achieve enlightenment. Something along those lines. Of course, I'm like the Buddha. I'm like the students who can't just immediately get it, which is what Zen is all about, because I'm talking about it. And the Buddha, only one student could get it without talking about it. In China, it's known as Chan, which means walking. So walking is another meditative technique. And in Japan, that becomes Zen. Another of is Tibetan Buddhism, which is also known as Vajrayana. It could be translated as the Thunderbolt Buddhism. And Tibetan Buddhism is almost the complete opposite in terms of aesthetics and images to Zen Buddhism, because it's so full of gods and monsters and all sorts of weird and interesting things happening. I mean, look at what's going on here. What is even happening? You got monsters, you got weird sexual acts. It's pretty wild. And it seems like Tibetans had a really strong polytheistic tradition, and those gods and monsters became incorporated into Zen Buddhism when Buddhism came to Tibet. But in Buddhism, they become demons of the mind. So these are all different symbols you can work with to help you overcome the problems in your head and help you get closer to enlightenment. Tibetan Buddhism tends to be very colorful. The 4 colored flags are a sign of Tibetan Buddhism, and they also use a lot of gold in their imagery. If they can get like gold and jewels for their holy statues, they will. So it's interesting. And they are into a lot of weird paradoxes, which have given them a sort of weird reputation, but I think it makes sense. They are kind of mystical, and they see nirvana and samsara as more of a continuum. The enlightened world and the unenlightened world is the same world, you're just looking at it from a different perspective. And so one of the things they do is to have weird imagery, like this sexual imagery, and use kind of taboos and things like, that are gross or that are sexual to kind of break one's assumptions and say, yeah, even this is a place where you can achieve enlightenment. They're stereotyped as, being the monks who are sexual, but that's not really who they are. They are more trying to use images of sexuality to achieve enlightenment in a weird paradoxical way. And the community, though, they might see these images and take more note of their sexual contents. The people who aren't monks might enjoy this more on a sexual level. Or maybe they'll just be weirded out. I don't know. But another cool thing about Tibetan Buddhism is that they've always had a really strong respect for women. So there are a lot more Buddhist nuns in Tibetan Buddhism, and the nuns have more power to make their own decisions and things like that, which is pretty cool. Okay, one last variety of Buddhism for you, and this is Pure Land Buddhism, which is very popular in Japan. And so this is pretty wild. So you would think that Buddhism is pretty different from Christianity. It's not about, believing in God and going to heaven, right? Well, in Pure Land Buddhism, it kind of almost is, because there was a bodhisattva whose name was Amitabha, and Amitabha made a vow to not, as bodhisattvas do, he made a vow not to go to nirvana until everyone in the world achieved enlightenment. But he also prayed that there be a special way to accomplish this. And so he created this special realm, which is called the Pure Land. And the Pure Land is like the fast track to nirvana. If you go to the Pure Land, you'll be sitting in a lotus flower, and you will be meditating all the time, and you'll be praying all the time, and you'll be in touch with the Buddha. And Amitabha is right there. He's meditating along with you. And all the trees are whispering messages that help you get towards enlightenment. And all the grass and all the plants and the animals are helping you get towards enlightenment. Everything in the Pure Land is leading you towards enlightenment. So if you don't feel like you can achieve enlightenment in your lifetime, simply say the name even of Amitabha, and he will get you a shortcut. He will make it so that when you die, you will reincarnate in the Pure Land in a lotus flower, which is a symbol of meditation and enlightenment, and you will be there. And so you don't have to worry about whether you achieve enlightenment in your lifetime. You can achieve it after your lifetime with the help of Amitabha. And there's many different versions of this. Sometimes the Pure Land is also called the Buddha Fields, which is pretty cool. And some people disagree with this notion. There's obviously Buddhists who say, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. That's not the way Buddhism should work. But for a lot of people, it is the way Buddhism should work. And especially in Japan, it got really popular as a way for, everybody to participate in Buddhism, not just monks. So everybody be a part of it. I just think it's kind of interesting that something so different from Christianity could end up in a relatively similar place. You pray, and then you're taken to this important place after death. Of course, it is different in terms of your, good or evil doesn't really have a status on whether you go to the Pure Land. So in a way, the Pure Land is kind of more like purgatory because it's trying to improve you rather than heaven. But, it's just kind of interesting to see where these similarities and differences come in. Okay, that's all I want to say about Buddhism. All right, so I believe there is going to be a quiz on Buddhism, so don't forget about that. And if you have any questions, let me know. We're flying through world religions, but I think we'll get to talk about some awesome stuff and keep talking about awesome stuff. So I'll see you in the quiz and the discussion section. All right, see ya.